If you plan for worst case and you're like, this is what I'm going to do, well, then any improvement in that base case, if you put that process in place and you're patient, you're going to see a higher level of return. Welcome back, everybody. Behind the Grind with Rich Brubaker and
Brian Tam. What up?
What's up, man? How's it going?
Yo, this year. About to get started. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Right? Because things start a little later in China for us, right? There's a new year. There's the Christmas holiday. Then there's New Year. Then there's Chinese New Year.
Yep.
And that's a weird time.
Stop, start. Yeah. Yep.
How do you handle that? Like, that's what we're going to talk about, right? Yeah. Thinking about next year, this 2020 year, for us is still kind of next year. What's your process to go through that?
Right.
And then things happen. Forget about all that because...
Well, I think planning is planning, and planning is great. And we're going to talk about how we plan for 2020. But we're in the middle of the coronavirus right now.
Yep.
Right? We just had... We just apparently had the trade war finished, right? Yeah. And the summer, actually for 9 months, we had all the stuff going on in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going to talk about like how we plan for 2020, how we broke it down. And then at the end, we're going to spend some time talking about like contingencies, emergencies. When stuff comes out of left field that just socks your budgeting, socks your project line, turns your project line into a sewage line, what happens? Because that's very real, right? And that happens. And the only thing you can do is work harder, work your way through it. And I want to talk about like how we got started for 2020, what we're looking at, what were the important things, but then how do we take the punch that wasn't even in our ring, right? Somebody came in just punched us and ran out, and like how do you recover from that? Because you have to. You can't look at an emergency and say, oh well, I can't do anything. Like you have to find ways.
So we'll talk about that at the end, right? And so just to start off, typically, you've been through a few cycles now. How do you think about the future? Or how do you think about annual planning as a general thing? As an entrepreneur, how do you think about it? Do you do it?
So I do, and actually I've changed how I do it. And I was actually thinking back to my first company. I remember I had like
that you worked at.
No, the one that I started.
Okay,
yeah. So China Strategic Development Partners Limited. We did market research. We did sourcing. It was such an awesome name. I remember I went on a family vacation and we went to a nice place that had a pool, and I sat around the pool with like this yellow legal pad, and I was writing out like.
Sorry, what year was this?
Hey, look at this shirt. Yellow legal pads and this shirt, they go well together. But I would sit there and I was listing out the products I want to do, the companies I wanted to work. Like I was getting through every single piece. I had like 10 days. And
you started the company already, or what?
I'd already started the company, and I was like, I've already got projects. Where do I want it to go? Now I'm looking at it, and the first thing I start off with is like, who are my current clients? Which ones are coming back? Who's on my team? Which ones are staying? And then, how do I want to grow this year? And actually, this for me starts usually much earlier. But at the end of the year, I'm really looking at, okay, what does the first quarter of the next year look like? Because we have Chinese New Year, because we have New Year. So that's always the hardest financial project sales, biz dev part of the year. It's also when most teams disperse, because once Chinese New Year passes and bonuses come out, like, bye, I'm going to the next thing. So it's actually the most uncertain time. So actually what I try to do is I try and start with planning around that time. What's the most uncertain? What do I need to nail down? And I'll start talking to teams in November, December about what they need to get done January, February, assuming nothing comes out of left field.
Oh,
right?
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So in that regard, you're talking to them about what they need to do. What does that mean? Like internally, or you're talking about projects, or what?
So both. First off, from the project side, okay, what projects do we have on? Okay, usually,
wrapping things
typically, I have very little going on at Collective January, February. There's no events. There's no speaking engagements. There's very little research that would start at that time. But there's probably some lingering projects, or some of our consistent large projects, those maintain. So, okay, this project, it's been a 3-year project. We know it's not going to change. This one's a multi-year project. Where is it in the cycle? That one's not going to change. But outside of, say, those 2, 3, 4 projects, we tend to carry 10 to 12 overall. What are we going to do with all that extra time?
Right.
And that's where it becomes like okay, let's do some research. Let's let's go and figure out like what do we want to do. Let's do some product development. Let's look at, some trends that we don't have time for that we should spend more time on.
Do you have a system for that, or?
It's a little bit hit and miss right now.
Okay.
Because it's usually generated through, I'll come up with some ideas of like products I want to work on. I think this year what we were planning on doing is like we sit down as a team, we figure out what products did we sell over the last 3 years, what services, and then what should we cut out so we can focus and grow for this year.
That's what you just did.
That's what we just did. And then we started to realign the team around. So I aligned one team member around one product and said, because you've managed this project, say 40% of your time last year, and you did a good job, and I believe you can do better, do more. We're going to make this like 80% of your time.
Wow.
And you're going to start selling. You're going to start managing the relationships. You're going to take a bump up. And it was because of this process, like, what do I want to do next year? What do I want to accomplish? How do I want to scale? That I was able to like realign that person and just formalize.
So can you break it down again? Just like, what's the framework that you're looking at? Do you have a framework, or you just kind of have individual conversations, or
so
what?
It basically starts out with me looking at like, say, our current projects, our current budget, our current team.
Okay.
And then really just what is fixed, what is not going to change,
the fixed part,
January, February, March, what's not going to change 2020 in any of that.
Right.
If it's fixed, don't even think about it. Right? Like there's some, every once in a while I'll look at a current project. Like I have several projects that are like 2, 3, 5 years long. What I will do is I'll figure out like what can we do different this year. But that's a small conversation. That's like the 5 to 10% tweak that I will do with the team. This is super fixed. I don't want to consider it right now, but we need to have a team conversation about how we can bring another level, how we can take it to the next level of scale or whatever. But then it's like, this is the variable. What do we need to do? What do I want to do? What we need to do is we need to lock down sales January, February, March, or October, November, December, preferably, so we can keep kind of continuity going. And then what do we want to do? And this is actually where I spend more and more of my time now. I think as the organization grows, as our project, like they stabilize, they get bigger, our longer commitments, it's easier to do less of like we don't have the big dips. We have dips. But I remember 3-4 years ago, we had dips. It was like, I really need to make a sale in February or it's going to get tough. Right? Now it's like, okay, we're okay, but through that dip, what we need to do is actually figure out what do we want to do. And that's where, like, the framework changes. Now, it starts off with me, and very quickly, then it becomes me and Sid will talk, because she looks at this differently. She looks at it from the team and the process perspective. So I'm like, this is my vision. She's like, this is our process. And then it turns into, okay, what team members do we need to add? Then look at the budget. What's that going to cost? Okay. And then how do we want to shift people around? And then we start talking to the team as the next stage of the process, right? And then the work starts to take place.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there's a kind of like, you need to get your own thoughts formulated, and then you start to see how realistic and feasible that might be. And then you go down to the team level and be like, all right, how are we going to do this, right? That's interesting. And how about in terms of like goal setting and everything? Is that something specific, or you just keep it fuzzy with the vision? That's
a goal for this year. Actually, so targeting. This is actually something that, like, actually through my conversations with Sid, let's call it 3 weeks ago, we sat down, and she's kind of new to the business, and so like she's been with us for a year. She knows the work ish. She's still like getting her, but what she want to do is like she want to look at all the pieces that we do and try and figure out what should we focus on, things like that. But then the second goal is the second part of the conversation is like goals. What should our sales goal be? I've never had a sales goal. I've always had do more. Sell more.
I love that. Do more.
Cash, more team. More projects. More. And that was it wasn't specific numbers. But I think I mentioned this.
And that's normal for a lot of entrepreneurs early on when everything is so uncertain, right? You're just like, how am I supposed to project? There's just too many variables.
And especially when you don't have a lot of, say, products or services that are fixed.
Right, right.
Like if you're selling one service, it's easy to say, okay, we did 6, we want to do 10.
You can project out.
We want to do 20.
Right.
And like this is what it's going to take from a sales perspective to get it. Now, say for the hackathons that we do, I have a goal every year of 4 minimum, 6 maximum. Last year we did 3. Okay, so I came up short. But I know how to make
that was last year's goal.
Work.
Right.
Like if I say 4, now I know one client, I get 1 a year. I know I did 3 others this year, or 2 others this year, and I know that if I did a good job, I can
probably convert
80%. I should be able to convert it again.
Yeah.
But then I know that there's other companies that if I write content, if I talk about the work that we do through social, through LinkedIn, through email, and it's just that numbers game, I know I'm going to get number 3 and 4 if I put the time in.
Right.
Or if I hire someone specific to sell it, I know I'll get 6 to 8. Because actually it's a product that people want. But it's a matter of if we don't sell enough, it's because we didn't talk enough about it.
Right.
So it's actually really, I think it's actually very logical.
Yeah.
When you're setting up like the actual KPI though, where I started to really appreciate this, was remember in the first week of January, fly back, and I worked with a friend of mine he's got a really large company now. It's just scaling, and the whole team, he's gone from like 60 to 120. His sales numbers, it's like,
congratulations.
And he was out there saying like, we're going to hit this number, we're going to do this many projects, we're going to be in this many countries, we're going to do, and he had, I'll call it 6 to 8 numbers that would continually come out through the 4 days of meetings with his team. And he would hammer and hammer. He just like, he had thought about this very clearly with his, I think he calls it his executive leadership team. Yeah. And I don't know how many people are involved in that. But basically what was clear is the quarter before that, they had spent time together. They came up with that. And I really started to appreciate that as you grow as an organization, like, we're entrepreneurs more. No, I think at like 15, 20, 30 people, you have to start really codifying the numbers, your targets. You have to start defining success as well. Like what would a successful year look like? And then what's the work going to take to get there?
Right, on multiple levels. And I think for us, we work on this abstract level of the vision and how we want to feel at the end of it. And that's great. And we inspire people with that. But then you got to break it down into the numbers level, either in terms of projects or products.
And I used to do that. And so this gets into budgeting. I will say in budgeting, I do that a little bit, where I'll have like this fanciful, if I sell this many, blah, 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 this is what it'll look like. But the problem is even though I do that process, and I will go through, I'm like, that's realistic. I have never yet matched that to the work.
No, never.
And that I think is the next jump when it comes to, it's not just 2020 planning, but 2020 work, right? Yeah, I think I want to get to that point.
Is that predictable?
Yeah, I'd like that. I think predictability at some level, like where you're 60, 80% confident in like what the year's going to look like. Right. Then there's that 20, 30% you're like, I can experiment a little bit.
All right, 60, 80 is still pretty. That's pretty high. It's still pretty open. Yeah, there's still a lot of uncertainty.
But that is, I wouldn't even call it uncertainty. It's open. Yeah. And we talked about this in the past, like how we like to experiment. We like to be artistic in what we do. What I think is that it allows you to like, look, if I've got all the bills paid, like if I have cash for a year to pay the staff, and I'm going to bring in 60% of what I thought gravy, how do I want to make the next 20, 30, 40%? Do I want to stabilize around a certain product, create something new? Like what do I want? And I actually, having that option as part of your planning has always been exciting for me. Yeah. Right?
Interesting.
I don't know how they'll change as, Sid and I become maybe 3 or 4 senior leaders who are organized. Like, I think what we'll start to see is a lot less that 20 to 30 woo. We'll turn into 1, 2, 3, 4, like real tactical conversations.
Wow, cool. Yeah, for me, that process is quite different. Again, working on a small team, we really go from an individual level to the team level and then to the future, right? So what I mean by that is individually, we look back on the previous year and we say, what went well, what didn't go well for you individually. And they have to reflect on that. And maybe we might poke and provide a little bit of feedback around that, but I realize so much of it is an individual thing, like their own personal understanding of how they're doing, that it's just from their point of view, and I just give a little bit, but from there if that's how you were last year, then what do you want to be different in the future? So on an individual level, and I think that's the second step that we have. First, past individually, then future individual. Then after that, the third question is, how do you want to use Let's Make Great, our team, as a platform for what you want to achieve next year? And so, and then what does that mean? Fourth question then, what does that mean for all of us? If all of us are moving in this direction, then how are we going to work together to achieve that together?
And you do this as a group.
So the first question is individual. Okay. We reflect, we share together as a team. Then the second one is where we're sharing together as a team, where we're thinking about our future. So those two are individual. We send them a framework of questions, and we've been doing this basically since the beginning. I think maybe in the first year we didn't do it because, I think we did it from the first year, and we kept this habit. And it's pretty easy because it's just these set of questions, and now everybody knows to expect it almost. But at the same time, it's interesting is that sometimes they have to deal with the emotional side of it. They're meaning like they didn't perform well last year.
Right.
How are they gonna deal with that? And so that's where we need to come in and coach each other and give a voice to each other to help each other calibrate on our performance for last year. Because if you only see from your own perspective, right, you only see either if you're a negative person, you're going to see all the negatives. If you're a positive person, you only see positive. It's not the whole picture. So that's what we want to balance for each other. And so we do that in the second and third meeting, basically. Then we think, all right, how do we use our goals? How do we use Let's Make Great to fulfill our goals? So it's a kind of inverse way of thinking about it, where we're going to go top down. Because again, on a small team, on a young team, and on a mission-driven team, passion-driven team, we're just fundamentally working in a different way. So we're starting from the bottom up, basically. So then we share with each other, I'm working on this personal project, I'm working on that personal project. For the business or my career, I want to develop it in this way, with these set of skills. And then we ask more questions like, what does that look like? What are your metrics for that individually? And we go around that and try to have everybody create some sort of number around that, right?
Process kills me.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. It sounds like a lot, but like because we've been doing it so many times that we have the system, we have the framework. We just send an email out, and basically we know when to start it and when to end it, and then from there we have all those. Basically, it's like roughly 4 weeks of conversation, like one per week. It gives some people time to think about it, marinate in their heads a little bit, and then they can share around the New Year time. And then we think even bigger, and we think, all right, that's what we want individually. Now, we also want to think as a team, because each of us are partners. How do we want to think about 2020 in the future? Now, or even 5 to 10 years out, what are we aiming at in the big picture? And so there we're looking at, all right, what are the trends in the market, competitors, just consumer trends, of course, and then our clients' trends, like how are they moving? And then, of course, some sort of like weird technology things that we're just seeing out in the distance, right? And then we're projecting out like, all right, what might be interesting for us, and how do we want to react to how we were in the past, and also where the market is going in the future. Sure. So it's kind of this like back and forth loop in basically the first month. So each one of those first part of the process I was talking about, that happens at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and then it extends.
How much massaging do you have to do to get that all into alignment? And then do you have to cut things off? And then what kind of conversations does that then generate?
So the massaging is very, very, it happens organically, actually, because people can see like, all right, this is really a personal project, and this is probably more of a work-related project. And so there is we see where it just naturally overlaps, because again, we've been together a little while, we know each other, and we know what's relevant, what's not. But at the same time, a lot of the personal projects end up with the team projects anyway. This is weird how the dynamics of the team and the chemistry of the team and the selection of the team is playing out in this way. I couldn't have predicted it, but it is working out this way. So thank God that it is. So that's working out. And then I've seen, at least with my team as creatives, I can't massage it too much. I can't manipulate it in a certain way, right? Because they're like boneheaded, stubborn enough, determined enough, persistent enough to eventually get to
or
what they're going to be.
they're right.
Or they're right, because it's their own life, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So ultimately, that's why I'm like, all right, so I'm always, what I need to think instead of how do I need to massage our group goal for them, but how do I get their group goal or their goal to benefit the rest of the team?
Now, if you look at like the needs of Let's Make Great as an organization,
right.
does that boneheadedness, collective process pull you away from the mission?
Right.
Like if you look back and go, oh, we should not have agreed or done or whatever. Like, do you feel like that happens? Because I mean, as a top down kind of like, look, we are on track. This is, and we talk to the team. We want their feedback. We want their buy-in. We want their engagement. We want all that. And that's not to say that it's not important, but if we were to just let the whole team make this planning up at this point, I really think like how much, like it might be much better actually. It might not be much. I'm not sure, but I'm really like, how do you feel? Like, do you feel like it pulls you off and you miss the ability to focus and scale and blah, blah, blah? Or is it like, no, this is actually, we are an organism that we're actually really well aligned, and we're all spastic, interested in everything anyway. So it kind of like, it keeps us focused.
I think by doing it this way, there are a lot of uncertainties and a lot of questions that we have for each other in some cases. Like, why are you working on that? That has no relevance to what we're doing here. And that time that you're spending is pulling you away from our core mission. So that happens. And what I have to do as the boss and the leader is like, okay, this is part of it. Everybody has their own thing, and it's fine, right? And so we don't own 100% of the time or anything, right? So they have to be able to develop themselves in a certain way. What I think it does though is that it allows for them to mature as a person. So they kind of have to come back at the end of the year and reflect like, oh, I didn't hit my goals, or I didn't hit our company's goals. Why is that? And so because we're doing that first section first, like reflect on your last year. What went well? What didn't go well? What were your main challenges? What did you learn? And what were successes? Of course, that forces them to be critical, right? And again, we provide a little more feedback, and so then they kind of go like, okay, they can start connect the dots. But if they never connect those dots, then they're always going to be blaming me, right? And I take responsibility but they also got to pick up their end of it too.
Okay, so I kind of want to move a little bit from planning into then, okay, you really opened up a conversation about measurement and like accountability.
Right.
How often do you find that your yearly plan, your quarterly plan is the actual framework that you then judge performance as at the organization, but at the individual level? And like, do you find that you're like, like we have this plan, but it's okay.
Yeah, definitely. We kind of go like, we know that's where we want to go, but we also have to have patience to get there and persistence to get there, right? So, while we set that some basic metric, we're not penalizing anybody around that. The accountability is very much on their side, and we expect it, but I have enough to worry about for myself. I need to carry my own stuff, right? So. So at the end of the year and throughout the quarterly check-ins, we will bring it up, like how you're doing with your goals, and the goals for the company, how we're doing as a company, but there's no whip. Right. Okay. And so because there's no whip, everybody's a little more easygoing in a certain way, right? But it creates a very diffuse end, right? So it's more open.
And I think this is, I'm really curious because, when we think about like how we want to grow organizations long term, like, we've talked about process, we've talked about internal comm, we talked about all these things that are so important. And I also think that one of the things that we miss or that's lacking or that we need to improve on is, when we create these plans, I think, as I was talking about, like, I create this plan that I believe is possible if I do the work, but then we don't really hold ourselves accountable. So I was actually thinking like, for hands-on, like our big metric is, how many hours we have, how many people we serve, how many volunteers involved, and then we have a bunch of other things. Why don't we put these on the wall in front of everyone?
That's cool.
Like, but maybe it's not, but maybe it is. Like, and I'm just thinking like, how do you, if you're really clear and you're like, no, this is our mission for this year, how can we make sure that we don't give up? That we're like, no, you know what? We said we are going to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Saturday, but buckle down. We said we are going to do this together.
Right.
And it's your idea, dude.
Right.
And I backed you. But you're giving up, and I'm not going to let you give up. Like, it's kind of like, and I wonder, like, when it comes to planning, like, it's almost like 2020 execution. It's a whole nother episode, of course. But, you know, I think when it comes to planning, I'm also curious at how you plan to hold your feet to the fire. Like, do you sit there and go, you know what, no, this is the goal I'm not going to give up on? Or, because I don't have that. I'm all, this is where I think it'll be, and I'm pretty comfortable with this. And if the rest happens, it happens. Like, I actually think this is something that I need to improve on. Right? Like, that's a goal for me for this year, to improve on this process. But also, I think, like, as you grow as an organization, it just becomes much more important to have that.
So for me, what we do around that is, you know, the goal, we have the goal, the metric, and all that kind of stuff about where we want to achieve. And then we kind of forget about it, and we go about our business, and we make sure that we are doing it, and we check in every once in a while, right? Every quarter. And then again at the end of the year. But then besides that, we don't let it go, because the goal is actually not that goal. The goal is the individual's growth.
Right.
That's how I see it, right? So whatever happens, and however they need to go through that cycle of the challenges of missing the mark, that's more important than the actual physical goal. Because I mean, the problem with a lot of the goal setting that we've set some ridiculous goals in the past, and I'm like, all right, that's what we think we're going to try to do, then that's what we're going to try to do. But then they also need to calibrate that, like, that goal was just unrealistic. Why are we doing we're not going to 2x. Right? And they need to figure that out. Right. And I'm very happy that they're so positive and passionate.
Maybe you could 2x, but this is the work that's required.
Exactly. And so that's the give and take of it, right? And so we need to but they need to figure that out. Yeah. So that's the part that I'm like, all right, well, the goal was the goal, and we didn't hit it. But the other goal, the more important goal for us, again, was you realizing certain things and you developing certain skills, right, as a team, and me also as a team, as a manager and a boss. So all of these, it's very much like the reality of our individual strengths rather than this, like, this stick that we're throwing out there and seeing if we can catch up to it. Right. So it's a different kind of way of going about it. And then, of course, the reason that is because reality happens.
Yes.
So
shit happens, people, and it's happening right now.
A lot. Again and again and again and again, right? Yeah. So when that happens, or you've been through a few storms, how does that affect your planning?
So actually, look, if we keep just China, like let's just do like China. I think I got that down. China.
You got it.
In the last 18 months, we have had economic trade war, which definitely resulted in a bit of a slowdown on the manufacturing side.
Well, that was already happening.
So that's two things. This accelerated. Right. You had the Hong Kong protests, which turned into full-scale riots. Then now you have the coronavirus. Now, I've been through SARS. I've been through the economic downturn. I've been through.
Here for that.
I was here for all that. Now, the only thing I'll say about what's happened in the last year and how it affects planning is just the fact that it's kind of like it's this cumulative thing. Yeah. So you have a little bit more structural thinking, I think, like a little bit more like, do we stay in China? A lot of my friends are saying this is now the reason why we need to diversify away from, like, not leave China, but like you better have your Southeast Asia, your US, your EU platforms, and that's going to cost because you have to fly more. You have to, so. Just generally, why I think it's important when it comes to planning for emergencies in advance is that it removes a little bit of the edge. It allows you to think a little bit differently when it starts to happen. Because right now, people are literally just go to Twitter, hashtag Wuhan. It's a shit show. And
there's a lot of fear. I think that's what's happening. There's a lot of fear. Hysteria.
Anxiety.
Yeah.
And let's just from public fear, the business side of this is, I'm leaving for at least 2 weeks, if not more, mainly because my son's school got canceled for an additional 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, knowing that, what I know now is nobody else is coming back. What then that takes me to is February is a write-off. Like, just forget it.
Which is a critical month. I mean,
is a critical month.
January was lost because of the holiday.
Right.
Now February is going to be a loss because of this this pandemic, or whatever you want to call it.
So having been through this rodeo a few times, what I know now is, first off, do what you need to do to lock things down, right? Like, make sure you have the projects on target. Make sure you have your funding in, or you've collected as much as you can, and like, get things tied down. And then do the things that you believe are going to help you through this thing. So when I'm looking at this now is like, okay, our team is kind of prepped. They know what's going on. We're now in a mindset like we're not going to make a sale. So what does this look like from the cash flow?
I mean, right now it's the holiday.
Yeah.
So did you interrupt the team?
Not yet. We will tell them in the next few days like what our plan is.
Okay.
So having a plan and communicating that plan internally to the team, and also letting our clients know what's going to happen. But from the planning perspective, what this does is, like, let's be honest, this is going to be an amazing time to develop some business. You start getting onto LinkedIn, you start writing your content, you start catching up on all those things organizationally.
So there are things that you could be doing. There are things that you can be doing.
You don't just stop because stuff's happening. And that is the reality. Is like, when I go back to SARS, we had 2-3 hours of work a day. And then we go back, and actually most people just went to their local pub or their local whatever and like hung out together, self-quarantined.
It's different times.
Different times, self-quarantine. But then actually what you found is like you built the best relationships from that time.
Yeah.
Now, Hong Kong was different. Hong Kong, it wasn't a direct impact to my business from the practical operations, daily.
Yeah.
What it did was it actually created a lot of emotional distraction from business developing in Hong Kong for my China business. So what's the way I get around that? I, years ago, started looking at Singapore and Bangkok and New York and all these bases of people that I need to be constant communication with. So this is the thing is like, I realize like when
lay the groundwork
well in advance of any potential problem.
Right.
Because the reality is, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what industry you're in, something is going to disrupt you, right? And it might be a 3-month thing like we're seeing here out with the virus. It might be 9 months with the Hong Kong thing. It might be 5 years with the trade war.
There's a once-a-decade thing, but there's so many once-a-decade things. And right now it seems like it's the perfect storm, or things are getting a little bit more compounding on each other.
So there's a few things that I think help weather.
Right.
One is, from my business perspective, we are 100% organic. I don't have an investment. I don't have debt. It's just cash flow basis.
Right.
And I have cash in the bank. I know what I have, and I'm comfortable with it for a determined amount of time.
Right.
If I were leveraged up, imagine the anxiety now. You're like if you're a manufacturer of, say, like aluminum products, you are taking a letter of credit against that aluminum that you're purchasing, and then you've got to like sell it in a bad environment. Like, that's a whole different thing.
Both ends.
Right, you lose on both ends. So
bring it back to planning. And emergencies happen, and so people can't change some of the things they can't change. Right. In terms of like debt, they have to do what you can with that. But like what I heard from you was saying, all right, figure out what do you have, start to communicate internally with the clients and everything like that, and then what's after that?
What's after that is like try and just make the best decisions possible.
Okay, right. And then maximizing this tragedy or whatever it is, the emergency, and turn it into something positive.
So let's take this back a few behind the grinds where I talked about the 3 steps of getting through a crisis.
Yeah. Right? Rewatch that one.
Emotional control. We'll link it above. Emotional control.
Yeah.
Remove the emotions of the trade war, what you think politically, whatever. Remove the reality, like what you think about the riots in Hong Kong. Remove how fearful you are of dying from coronavirus, whatever, right? Like, remove that. That doesn't help you. Second is process. What's your cash flow look like? What do your projects look like? What have you got on that you need to keep going? And then what do you need to get started? What are some switches that you need to turn on so that when this all ends, that you come out better for it? I won't call it maximizing, but that you don't waste this time. Because the reality is it's very easy to be like, oh, everyone else is slow, So I'm going to dial it down a bit. I'm going to get a little bit more sleep. Like, that's fine. You can do that. But the way I'm looking at it is like, keep what you have going.
Yep.
Don't lose commitments and use this as an excuse not to do your work.
Yep.
But then start to actually communicate with people who are also on a slower time. That's what I'm saying, like LinkedIn, emails,
There's
phone
still
calls.
so much to do.
All these things that you can catch up on.
Yeah,
You can rebuild relationships. You can write content. You can do your 2021 planning. You can do all this stuff. Keep things moving.
Build new products. There's just so much potential out there, right? I mean, of course, and we're talking about emergencies that don't hit you directly. We're talking about systemic market conditions, right?
Yeah.
When things hit you individually, that's a different topic, and you have to deal with that
Everyone's
in your own
going
way,
through it.
right? But I mean, in this general case, it's a very good action plan, or just like 3-step process.
And then the last one is be patient.
Yeah,
right? Like,
sure.
this coronavirus is eventually going to peter out to the point where people are safe. They want to come back to China, and business turns back on. Now, what will the government do to drive? Like, now we're going to talk about China going back into a really tough economic time. What will they do? Well, why does it matter? How does that help you? Maybe if you think through it from a process perspective, you remove the emotions of it, you can actually figure out, like, okay, China will release a bunch of funding, and that will do X to my industry. Or China will not recover from this, and that will do this to my industry and this to my
So think 6 months out, a year out, right? I mean, things are going to happen, but how can you prepare for that?
Yep. And I tend to go, what's the worst case as a starting point? And then work it back. Because I think if you're like, it'll be fine, you don't plan for worst case, well then that's where you get in trouble. But if you plan for worst case and you're like, this is what I'm going to do, well then any improvement in that base case, if you put that process in place and you're patient, you're going to see a higher level of return.
Love it. I mean, this episode was really pretty interesting in the sense that we took it from a macro and general point of view. Yeah. But then we also brought it back to reality in the sense of like, all right, planning. Everybody, I mean, a lot of young guns, when you hear planning and thinking about the next year, you kind of like, no, you have to react more instantaneously, be fluid in the situation. And that's true too. But at the same time, you have to have the structure to plan out the next year. And then you also have to have the flexibility and the systems for when shit hits the fan. True. So I think this episode is really comprehensive in this way. It's fantastic. Key takeaways?
Plan ahead, prepare for anything, and just be patient with the process.
Yeah. It is a process. There's a lot of growing from this, and see what you can take away from what happened last year and also the emergencies that are happening right now. Because, I mean, there's no other way around it. You got to face the facts and get through it. So that's what we're going to do. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
See you in a couple weeks. Yeah. It's Behind the Grind from Shanghai Quarantine Level B1 with Rich Brubaker and
Brian Tam.
Have a good week. Be safe.